So, um, good afternoon, everyone. I think what I would like to do is spend next 45 minutes is to talk about how the talent landscape is changing over last. It has always been changing, but last couple of years, 2 to 3 years, has been extremely accelerating, primarily because of digital transformation and also what happened with pandemic, how pandemic kind of turned. So I'm going to share some of my thoughts around this and then talk about a couple of use cases. And if you have time, we'll deep dive and would be happy to do some exchange, discussion, and inputs from you. So let's deep dive. So this is what I intend to cover today. Probably spend almost 10 minutes or so in each section. So talk about why there's a shift or pivot in talent landscape. What are the drivers which are making the talent landscape shift? Second, why this shift is moving towards us to think about skill-based strategy. So I'll spend a little time about that. Then talk about what is skills-based strategy. What does it actually mean? How can we break it down to understand and comprehend? And then give some examples of some of the work I've done, and then talk about some use cases broadly. And then later, when we have time, we can actually deep dive. So that's what I intend to cover today. So I think let's deep dive. So just a quick caveat, I'm sharing my slides on full screen mode. So if there's any comments or Q&A, I can't see them. So what I'll do is after I finish each section, probably I'll toggle to see if there are any questions or comments. But currently, if you see any comments along the way, just give me a ping and just let me know. Then I'll look into those. Anyway, I intend to spend time on Q&A in the end. So when I was preparing for this presentation, I just went into Google and just typed Great Resignation, which is a term which we all have been accustomed to, right, over the last many months, many quarters, actually. So this is what Google's homepage says, when I type Great Resignation. How to hire and keep top talent amidst Great Resignation. I'm sure that's something which all of us are worried with. See what Forbes says, the Great Resignation is really an evolution towards a more employee-centric culture. I completely endorse that. And then research, the Great Resignation has not improved career paths. That's very important for today's conversations. And why is Great Resignation happening? I think we have been discussing a lot about this, but it's very interesting. Just wanted to tie to the context of what's been happening over the last couple of years. And what's very important is it's a great reset, right? As people say, and there's a churn, people are moving around, the attrition rates have gone up. And the need of the hour is to become employee centric. And they also used to use the term called the Great War of Talent. The Great War of Talent is actually happening as we speak, and then the only way to win the war is to become employee centric. Also, being employee centric in an industry in a country like India means career advancement, career opportunities. Therefore, the other article which says the Great Resignation has not improved career paths, and we need to see how we can solve the problem, because today people might move for money, but people from a long-term perspective always look at career aspirations and career growth. So with that background, let's dig a little deeper of what's been happening over the last 2 to 2.5 years. Now, if that was one pivot which changed everything, pandemic, the whole thing around pandemic and the Great Resignation over last almost a year now or more, another change has been happening for a couple of years, actually, at least many more years before pandemic. And that change is about digital transformation. And I'm sure many of you or all of you have heard of the term Fourth Industrial Revolution, how Fourth Industrial Revolution has actually triggered digital transformation. So, we talk about steam engines, how it changed the world, First Industrial Revolution, electricity enabled to create factories, do manufacturing and stuff like that. So that's the Second Industrial Revolution. Then the birth of integrated chips, IC chips, as they say, and personal computer and computing led to Third Industrial Revolution. And now we are in Fourth Industrial Revolution, where humans and machines need to coexist, right? So what you see on the screen here is very interesting. First time ever in the history of humanity, the rate of change of technology is accelerating faster than what humans can adapt. All of us, we're at a very interesting nexus point where if we don't learn faster and govern smarter, we will be left behind by technology, and therefore this massive wave of fourth industrial revolution, digital transformation, which has caught up in all industries, all clients, all not just IT, but every industry is changing. Telecom industry is changing with the 5G technology coming in. Now, irrespective of industry you come from, technology is having an impact on how you do business, what your business models are. 5G is an example, payments is another example, education, what happened over the last 2 years, everything going online, um, LXPs, LMSs, everything, right? So, this is very interesting nexus point, and couple of interesting research points from World Economic Forum published this report called Jobs of Future, where they predict 50% of employees would need reskilling by 2025 employees globally, and 40% of current workers' core skills are expected to change. So a huge part of our workforce needs to be reskilled because the jobs they're doing now will not exist in the future because of the fourth industrial revolution. And again, a significant part of the roles, even which are there, will continue to exist, will change its nature. So significant, huge investment of reskilling and upskilling needed. And not just that, to kind of address this problem, some of the organizations who are tackling this ahead, taking a skills-based approach, are companies like IBM, Google, Cisco, Unilever, and many more, probably not listed here. So we looked at the first pivot of the Great Resignation, the second pivot, which has been happening for a while, and actually, Great Resignation and what happened with pandemic is accelerating digital transformation now. So it's kind of feeding into each other, as we say, and that leads in an interesting place where there's so many challenges, right? Employee engagement has become a challenge. Having a very clear uh, sense of what skills I have in the organization is a challenge. Look at Great Resignation itself, the way people have been exiting the organization. There's so much of load on talent acquisition team or recruitment team to hire at scale, depending on size of the organization. And the notice periods are getting longer, the joining dates are longer, and people skip. So it's affecting business bottom line, right? What if we had a way of having a handle of skills of existing members better, so that we could actually do some internal mobility? I'm sure organizations do, many organizations have figured out how to do internal talent mobility, but what if we could accelerate? What's your ratio of build versus buy? Build versus buy, you need to think about it, right? And if we had a healthy ratio of build versus buy, the organizations which had a healthy ratio and healthy processes in place would have navigated this entire Great Resignation better. Others who heavily lean on buying talent have always already lost the race and are trying to recuperate, right? And that's where companies who have taken a skills-based approach are better and ahead of the curve. And that's one of the solutions I would like to dig deeper. There are obviously other things we need to level set, like compensation is a big piece which we need to level set. And there's so many things about the talent industry. But today my focus is more on to dig deeper into how skill-based architecture, how having a skill-based um, strategy can help us navigate further in fourth with respect to fourth industrial revolution, digital transformation, and also the Great Resignation that we're talking about. Now, what does this skills-based strategy mean? Very simple. Put skills at the center of everything. Does your skills of your employees, workforce, irrespective of the industry you represent, drive your workforce planning? Does it drive your hiring? Does it drive upskilling, reskilling? I'll share a couple of examples. Does it drive your internal talent marketplace, which I spoke about? Is it linked to market trends? Are you actually paying people for their experience or the jobs they're in, or are you paying people for the skills? I think it's a combination, right? And also, how does it drive performance and succession? So keeping skills in the center. So what it means is the big pivot is the big shift to make this happen is to move away from jobs to skills. Because let's say if you think of any job, let's say a job of an analyst, and then there's a stereotype of a job of analyst and the fixed job description and the competencies and everything. Uh, but if you further break it down, the job, there are actually a bunch of skills. And let's say I apply for a role, or I'm actually working in the role of an analyst. I bring with me series of my own skills, some which are related to the job I'm playing, the analyst in this example, some which I bring from my own work experience, and some of my skills I bring are hard skills. Let's say coding. or ability coding, let's say. It's a hard skill, it's not transferable. But let's say my ability to analyze, my ability to interpret, my ability to make presentations is a transferable skill. So, when you look at skills, they're actually hard skills. They're knowledge-based skills where you need to know things, from a domain, so on and so forth. They're hard skills, and they're also skills which are transferable. So when you move to a skills-based category, what to do is we actually break down skills to look at what are those transferable skills and say, hey, today you are an analyst. Tomorrow you want to become somebody, pick some other job role. Which of your skills can be integrated or aligned for that role? So that's a shift. The big shift is to move from jobs to skills. And then what does it give? It gives a huge competitive advantage of, let's say, if you had I'll take a simple example from IT industry. So you had let's say significant percentage of your workforce are core Java developers, and suddenly because of shift in digital transformation, your clients are looking for full stack developers. The easiest thing to do is look at your existing core Java developers and what delta do they need to make them up to full stack developers. But if your build versus buy is not aligned, then you actually go and start getting talent which are already full stack developed, and then obviously they cost more. They do integrate into the culture and the organization, and at the cost of your employees who are already in the organization at core Java, where with some delta bit of upskilling or reskilling, they would actually become full stack developers. They feel disengaged and they might leave the organization, and the vicious circle continues, right? So that's another example which you might understand. So the idea is to look at skills from the lens of what are knowledge-based skills, what are hard skills, and what are transferable skills. And then also look at something called skill adjacencies, which I'll talk a little later. But the idea is to not look for complete fit into any role, especially when you are building talent, but look at if you're in role A of an analyst, what are the adjacent roles where my skills can be applied? And with some delta upskilling and reskilling, I can be made ready for that organization. And when you actually look at all the roles of every employee in the organization from that perspective, you'll be able to have a nice roll-up view if you use technology to see what's my proficiency level of full stack enterprise wide, what's my proficiency level of project management. And then you have this bird's eye view at the org level, business unit level, team level, also at the individual level. You'll be able to roll up, roll down, and that gives you the benefit. And then when the new jobs open, jobs change, or new roles open, or you have to backfill roles, you'll have with the data, you will be able to play around more. And that's the first level. But then it feeds into workforce planning, then it feeds into reskilling. It can be used for talent marketplace. It can be aligned to paying for skills, not for experience or job titles. And then and also it enables performance and succession, because remember the first slide we saw where people said career paths are not actually impacted, and this will actually impact because the half life of technology is reducing. So therefore the skills people need to pick are so important. And there's also something called meta skills, which I call meta skills, which is skills which take a lifelong to learn. Things like learning agility, things like emotional intelligence, things like resilience. And it's important to pick for those skills, but also build those skills. So looking at the big shift, the big pivot is move from jobs to skills. And that's some of the organizations I showed in the earlier slide have done successfully, and therefore they have the cutting edge over talent and business results. So with that background, what are the advantages if you take a skill-based approach? You actually have a complete line of sight of your talent pool. And I give a short example. Let's say, finally, if you have the skills inventory data of all of your employees in one place, I can actually look at the skill profile of me, what are all the skills I bring to the table at what proficiency level, and you roll it up to a team, you roll it up to a function, a business unit, an enterprise, a region, a country, or even an organization, and then break it down. So, and that along with the information you have about life cycle of skills, which skills are actually getting sunsetted, which skills are getting more emerged, you have a sense of which skills you need to invest in, which skills you need to reskill people on, and whom to identify for reskilling because of the close fit, near fit. So that gives a complete line of sight for your talent pool once you move to that way of doing it. Therefore, also giving you an opportunity to identify skill gaps, keeping emerging roles in view, which is very important based on what you saw on the World Economic Forum's research, right? If 50% of the roles get extinct and 40% the core role itself changes, imagine how much of upskilling and reskilling will it do at scale. How do you identify the right people, not just for upskilling and reskilling, but also internal opportunities like internal talent marketplace, which leads to the third piece, creating career paths based on skills and adjacent skills, which I mentioned as an example. So let's say I'll take another technical example. Let's say you have a cloud analyst who's working on a cloud technology, and suddenly DevOps has become such a big need, and you need a DevOps engineer. So instead of going and hiring a DevOps engineer fresh from the market, what you could actually do is look at cloud engineer because they are adjacent skill and see what delta training do they need to become DevOps engineer or a platform engineer, right? So it's a kind of a site reliability engineer. So looking at skills from that way gives you faster build versus buy for you, but also new incremental career paths for the employees, and therefore engages them because you can, in the great reset, as I mentioned before, money is important, compensation is important, but for talent in India, it's always been career advancement and career progression. That's very critical. And the more you are able to find the right people to do it, the more you become successful. So that's some of the advantages of the skill-based approach. So what I'll do is I'm going to flip to the platform to see if there are any questions, comments so far. There seems to be, there's one question saying, what are the first steps to shifting towards skill ontology approach in organizations? Way to start? Good question, Rashmi. Thank you. And that's actually the next section I'm stepping into. So if this is the big picture, if this is what we're trying to do, how do we start? What are the small baby steps we can all take? So before that, I'll give a bird's eye view, a 50,000 feet view, or 30,000 feet view of what the skills ontology consists of. How do you kind of break it down? And then I'll take an example in the following slides about some examples of how I've applied it myself. So first, starting with the definition itself, where do you start? Rashmi, as you asked, the answer is start with skill ontology. What is skills ontology? The definition is simple. It enables to create a common language of skills and provides a standardized hierarchical classification of system and supports us to connect to various elements of HR. So as I mentioned in the earlier slide, and how we connect it to compensation and benefits, how do you connect it to talent and succession, leadership, upskilling, reskilling. So a common language of skills where you have hierarchy of description. And when I show the next slide, you will see a simple example. And having a common language, that's very important. So what's a skill? What's a sub-skill? We already agree on things like that. Now, what is this? Once you have this full-fledged skill ontology in place, these are some pieces you will have in place. And that's what I wanted to tell you. And this is also shows the gradual path you can take. The first is to have skills foundations in place. And in skills foundations, you have to get your talent philosophy right. It starts with guiding principles. Let me take my pointer here. Starts with guiding principles. So do you believe in, build over buy or build versus buy? What's the ratio? Get your talent, guiding principles, culture principles right, so that they're actually attributing to skills-based approach, or they might come against. So first start with the guiding principles. Then you create something called a skill inventory. I'll show an example of skill inventory in the next slide. Then you will understand. Like, at least start with a simple template. I'll show a simple template of skill inventory in the next slide. Then every skill has people operate in every skill, demonstrate skill at various proficiency levels. The simplest is 3-level classification: beginners, intermediate, advanced, or beginners, practitioner, master. Or you could even take 5 scale or 7 scale, but simplest is start with 3. But the biggest question is, how do you know they're demonstrating that proficiency? I'll get to that in a minute. Before that, skills repository. Where do you get, once you define skills, where do you get your source of skills from? And the various repositories, which I will see in the next section right here. I'll talk about that. Then also, what are the sources of skills and how do you evaluate? How do you grade them in a way to basic, intermediate, advanced? So getting those basic foundations in place is the first thing you need to do. The second thing is, when you go to skills repositories, it's very important to understand, identify generic repository of skills. And whichever industry you represent, we can always get a generic repository of skills either from an organization or an entity like project management. Let's say it's important for you, you can actually get, you can actually align to PMI Institute, and they already have broken down with the PMBOK everything about project management, right? So you're always, there are always generic repositories. You don't have to start from scratch. You can source to or refer to as a best practice. Second, identify specialized repository of skills. Let's say you're working in telecom, then there's 5G. Let's say you're working on 5G, and there's obviously this industry body which talks about the emerging technologies in telecom. Or if you are doing architecture, enterprise architecture, then you have a TOGAF to refer to. Or if you have, depending on industries, right? There are always specialized repositories you can tap into. Even various HR consulting firms do that, right, across the globe and across our country also. Then, depending on the business you are in, there are some skill repositories you need to tap in inside your organizations. Could be domain specific, could be product specific, could be platform, could be roles, whichever domain, subdomain you are, right? So repositories come from these three sections. You need to identify generic repository for all generic kind of skills. If you have any specialized skills, a specialized repository from the market, and then internally also, where you get the rest of the data from. Once you've identified that, then when you actually map identify skills for a role or a person, then now this section talks about how, like, I'll go back to the example. I applied for the job role of analyst, and I'm working as an analyst. Now, how do you evaluate at what proficiency level am I performing for the skills leader as analyst? One way to evaluate is to actually look at my activities of my job description and my output of my work, right? One is activity, what I do in the job. Second is the content, which is output I create. That itself can be a reflection of my proficiency level, and generally you can use subject matter experts or the manager of the person to evaluate. The easiest way to start is self-declaration. Anil, where do you think are you in analyzing information? Basic, intermediate, advanced. I declare. Then you can go and ask my manager to evaluate, and they might agree to what I say or not agree. So the simplest way is to start from there. The most evolved, which will eventually kind of gravitate towards, is actually using something called assessment centers, or actually assessing them on the skills. You take input from their activity, content, and declaration, but most importantly, you actually assess them through real assessments. Could be simulations, could be psychometric tools, depending on the industry and sub-industry anyway. And then now we have enough tools available in the industry to actually objectively assess somebody on the skills they need for the role. And there's some use cases I'll talk later of how we are kind of trying doing this at scale. And then once you figure out the foundations, the repositories, and how you will source skills and how do you grade them, then you start looking at, most importantly, how you can digitize this, because without a platform it can't work. Initially you can probably survive in a spreadsheet for a while, but then you start seeing how to digitize this. And secondly, how do you want to connect to all aspects of HR, as you see the definition above, right? So that's like a very foundational overview of the components of skill ontology. Now what I'll do is I'll start with something very practical and pragmatic. So a simplest way to start with the skill inventory, if all that is there, you can start with simple skill inventory. Here's a simple example. Take a spreadsheet, and this is my preference, and different people will have different preferences, but I just take a 4-level hierarchy: category, subcategory, skill, subskill, and there'll be 2 more which I'll talk in a minute. So I take the simple hierarchy, and then I'm giving examples also so that you understand. I'll take a technology example, leadership example, and a generic language example. So categories, technology; subcategories, database. If you're in IT, the skill or skill group or skill cluster is RDBMS. Then I have a subskill called big data. That's how I could classify skills, right? So that big data isn't technology, but it's a database. It's related to RDBMS. Likewise, if I use the same classification for leadership, one example: category leadership, subcategory strategy, skill strategic thinking, subskill visioning. Visioning is part of strategic thinking. Strategic thinking is part of strategy. It's part of leadership. So you can take my role as a leader, break it down to a bunch of skills. One of the skill is visioning. You can take my role as a programmer or developer or analyst or architect. One of my role is ability to work with big data. Likewise, my language ability, language skills, language, French, level one, level two. Again, there are many European categories, levels, right? Basic, intermediate, advanced. So simple example. So in one of the organizations I worked for, what we did was we looked at all the existing data from, talent skill profiles of all employees reported, and did a lot of cleanup work because we're doing it for the first time, and then populated it in this format. We ended up having more than 3,000 to 4,000 line items at soft skill level. And that was like the first draft of the skill inventory of skills used in the organization. We still haven't mapped them to employees yet, but at least you have a common language, right? You're starting with what are the common list of things you need. And then you need to iterate, you need to update. So as they started working new different projects, we created a mechanism where we get a new list of skills and sub skills added. So at least we have a common skills inventory. And you can start in a spreadsheet, start something simple like this. And obviously, in the earlier slide, I spoke about repositories, right? There are a lot of industry repositories where you can borrow. You don't have to start from scratch. Just give me a simple example. Now, once that's in place, again, taking a perspective from a learning and development, because I'm a learning and development and talent professional, the next thing we did was, if I have a spreadsheet like this, data like this, which is kind of cleaned up, neat, clean, and everything, now against the sub skill, I would add another column, another hierarchy about proficiency level. So, beginner in big data, intermediate in big data, advanced. So for every row, I can actually add 3 rows, right? Leadership also, visioning, beginner, intermediate, advanced, language also. Then what happens is, from the catalog perspective, I'm kind of taking the skill inventory, now transitioning into a catalog. And then what I would do is I have 3 rows of big data, beginner, big data, intermediary, big data, advanced. And based on the learning offerings I do in the organization, could be from our partners, could be from the LXP platform, or could be the in-house programs I've built. Against each of that sub-skill coupled with proficiency level, I would tag the program offerings. Now you see what started as a skill inventory has become a catalog of offerings mapped to skills. And it has a huge advantage if you're doing training needs analysis or learning needs analysis in your organizations. Doesn't matter technical or not, because then what happens is when you actually roll out learning needs analysis to employees, managers, and leaders, everything can be linked to the skill inventory. So let's say you get a learning need analysis survey as a manager in your organization, and it says choose learning needs for your team, and you go there. The first drop down is technology. You select technology from the first drop down, and then you have list of things under technology. Then you choose for database. You choose this second drop down, database, and then it auto shuffles and you pick RDBMS, big data. See how you kind of do hierarchy of drilling down to the skill and sub skill you need without need to type anywhere, because it becomes a huge mess. And then that's how you can build your TNA. I'm just giving an idea if you haven't already not doing that. Once you build your TNA that way, and then when the training needs are submitted, you consolidate, or an employee says, big data beginner is my requirement, my need. From your side, you have already mapped these sub-skills to proficiencies and learning catalog of offerings. So it's so easy to fulfill a training request because you already done the mapping thing. Hey, 30 employees are asking for big data beginner. Let me plan a batch with 30 people and assign this blended learning program or send them to a classroom training or whatever, right? So this is where you start with a simple skill inventory, use whatever data you already have, don't build it ground up, but look at all the data. Could be resource management data, HR data, learning data, and build a small skill inventory and map it to proficiency levels, then map it to learning catalog, and try use cases like training needs, simple, so that you kind of get comfortable with the overall approach. And then, at least you have something get going. And that's how I've started with in one of the organizations I was working for when we started off this many years ago. Something very simple, you can start in the spreadsheet itself. And as one of you asked the question, how do I start? Where do you start? This is a simplest way to do that. Now, kind of accelerating forward from there, looking at an ideal state, now, if you start from there, eventually an ideal state is for every job role, there should be a skill profile which captures all this data. And all of us have HRIS systems which captures data for we ask our employees to fill the data. It's kind of ad hoc or rudimentary, but imagine if we can capture data of all of this, the full view of the skills from, let's say, as an analyst. I'll take continue with the same example. Anil, as an analyst, what is the knowledge you need to be successful? The knowledge skills, right? Which considers concepts and standards. And then what technologies or tools do you need to use to be successful in your role? And what are the typical job activities you need to do? And then depending on the client I'm working with or the industry I'm in, what domain or functional experience I would need, and to make it completely holistic, what are some behavioral and leadership traits I need to demonstrate? So if a job profile just from a job description statement can be broken down to all this, because everything is kind of now broken down and mapped to a skill, right? It's broken out to skill. And then if you have data at this level of an individual, obviously, let's say in technology, there is MS Teams, there's Visio, there is big data, and then let's say in tools, we have um, using neural or things like that. And again, eventually, you ask me to self-rate myself, manager rates me to the big as a beginner level, or then you assess, doesn't matter. So for every employee, if you have a skill profile like this, you have data of what skills they have and also they're operating at which proficiency level. Then you can actually look at the individual profile or look at the profile of a team, a function, a sub-function, a group, or a whole enterprise. Or you could pick a skill, big data, and look at the entire enterprise view. You could kind of roll down the whole organization to get a very skill based 360 view. And so if starting with inventory was a beginning point, this is where you have to shift into a platform or a system which can actually do this for you. And there's a lot of change management you need to do to get the data and everything, right? But this is the good end state to have all of this figured out. And then let's say you have a skill profile one and there's a skill profile two. What are the skill adjacencies which are common? What are the transferable skills? And then if I'm interested to progress into skill profile two, what are the learning paths I can take, career paths I can take? The whole thing kind of falls in place. So again, full view of skills of employee, organized view of one's talent across all aspects related to work. Can we map to proficiency levels? Initially, could be self-rating, then manager feedback, and later I'll talk about how you can use assessments to kind of actually get objective scores, especially when you're trying to identify top talent or when you're trying to select people, and then gives a full org view or a department view. So you start with that, but eventually you just go into a skill profile and get skill data for everybody, which is called skill inventory at org level. So that kind of the extreme end. And I wanted to give you something simple, but then also eventually build enough systems, change management support in place to kind of move to this level. And obviously, there are always, you don't have to do everything grounds up. There's a lot of repositories you can refer to, there are a lot of partners you can work with, but at least if you get the foundations right, it will be important. It will be easy for you to build maturity as you go. So one way this really helps is, again, the T-shaped career model has been around for a long time, but with pandemic, again, this is coming to prominence. So the whole idea of T-shaped career model is because technologies are changing so faster. How do you keep our employees ready not just for today but also for tomorrow, both from the perspective of the organization and also perspective of their own career growth, is to look at what are some areas where they need breadth of expertise and get them trained in all of those. And again, skill profile helps us to identify those. And what are some areas there we need to build depth of expertise? So again, color coding, breadth of expertise, they'll have a core technical ability, but they'll have a core industry and functional ability. That's the depth, right? And behavioral skills, again, some behaviors they need to have really strong. Some you kind of introduce them from the breadth perspective. And meta skills are, as I explained, lifelong learning, emotional intelligence, resilience so far. So once you have the data from skills profiles available, then we'll be able to look at based on the build versus buy decisions and the roles you need to open for the future for your organization, what's emerging. You need to start looking at the T-shaped model and say for every employee, we're not going to give you any ad hoc uh, development needs, which we generally do from a performance perspective, but take a long term view saying, hey, if you want to become make you a T-shaped professional, you are an analyst. What else can you do, Anil? What are the breadth of expertise you want to pick? They'll also pick one technical skill, one industry, one functional skill, one behavioral skill, one meta skill. And what are the areas where you want to continue a specialization? And we can kind of start having these kind of conversations with our members, which is more profound and deeper compared to asking, hey, what's your training need? Which is more very 30,000 feet, or which is more short-term focused, performance focused, near-term, right? So if you once you build systems like that, approaches like that, then you can actually try this. And again, my suggestion is start small, start with top talent, start with managers at certain level, leaders at certain level. Try this small, and then you can scale. But at least get your foundations right with ontology, the inventory, and skill profiles, and then take few use cases. And that's what I showed in the earlier slide. Start with few use cases. Again, which use case to use depends on the industry, the organization, and the type of situation you are in. So you'll be the you'll be the best judge to do that. But this is one way to kind of move from just training needs or just ad hoc individual development planning to actually building people's careers, which came up in the first slide, right? Career paths being a challenge. So, and then once you kind of doing all that, wanted to introduce, which all of you might be familiar, that we have plethora of assessment center technologies available where you can do this at scale. And you can actually, so that you can actually identify for the identified skills and sub skills, what are the proficiency levels of people, basic, intermediate, advanced, through a real objective assessment. So it's no longer self-declaration, no longer what my manager thinks, what I think, but actually real assessment. Could be 30 minutes, could be 60 minutes, could be longer. Some of the leadership stuff I've done in my earlier organizations was the shortest was a 60 or a 90-minute assessment for a graduate kind of a use case. The longest, an 8-hour full day assessment for leadership roles. So assessments can be used irrespective in the entire plethora, obviously for technology, for non-tech, for leadership, managerial, all of those are in place. And then what one of the use case which really helped me was when pandemic happened, we had to take train and induct hundreds of our graduates remotely. Then when training is happening remote, and how do you ensure they're getting the skill right, how do you demonstrate? So that's when we actually implemented virtual video proctored assessment engine at scale, first with graduates, then with employees at all levels, then top talent and other levels. So kind of once you figure all that out, then on top of it you can implement technology again, through partners or somebody where you can actually scale all this. And then each of those partners will have opportunity to share their skill libraries with you, or question banks, or you can build it in-house. It's a combination, but it's built on all that foundations I mentioned before. You can't just uh, try this. You have to do some foundational work or skill inventory and everything, as I mentioned. So just wanted to show you the progression of how it starts with the basic skill inventory to implementing assessment centers at scale, where you actually get real objective proficiency levels of employees. Then you can look at their skill profile data, roll up, roll down. You'll be able to make real intelligent decisions for build, buy, for the future also. So most common use cases where you can get started: graduate hire, junior hires is good, could be managerial development, MDPs if you're hiring from MBA schools. That's where you can actually try all that I mentioned as a use case, including an assessment center in combination to kind of actually objectively assess people. Also, from a acquisition perspective, talent sourcing for niche skills, again, one of the use cases maybe if you have time today, or maybe next time, is how we used it to hire niche skills in IT industry, where we actually used assessment center in combination of all this. And what we did was we actually got rid of we had two technical interview rounds. We got rid of first technical interview round by implementing the assessment center, and the assessment center actually gave more information, more insights and information. So instead of just looking at resume of a candidate and with the one pager or two pager feedback of the first round interview, now in second round I have the resume with at least a 15-20 page summary of how they performed in the assessment, and the assessment had technical, behavioral, everything, the whole plethora which I mentioned. So, and then you do shortlisting and everything, right? So the right candidates are surfacing, and you have their entire performance right available there, 15, 20 pages. And imagine the power that, along with their profile, gives for you as a hiring manager to ask the right questions, to dig deeper so that you pick the right talent for you, especially niche skills. It's a huge, huge value add. And third, now take an interview. The first two views were more hiring from the market, more from selection. The third internal view is to identifying the right type of top talent, because it's in all organizations it's easy to identify their performance because you get data from performance management, but potential is always a debate, right? When you're discussing about somebody's potential future performance, it's always a debate. So there are assessments you can build, again based on emerging technologies or leadership or behavior or a combination of all of this, to actually objectively assess their potential also through assessment centers. And that becomes a huge business case for you to identify the right type of people in your top talent programs, so they can invest in them, groom them for succession and future talent planning. So those are the most common use cases where all that I mentioned so far you can integrate and use, so that you can actually do some on top of all that, do some assessment center work to actually strike the right balance eventually between build versus buy, or improve your build mechanisms of building talent from within. And buy also have a amplified approach of buying the right, when you're hiring, getting the right people from hiring perspective. Those are typically the most common use cases. Now, a couple of resources, if you're interested to go and learn more about it, go and look up this website. Just Google this thing called Skill Genome Project. You'll see a lot of exciting stuff these people are doing, including the map you see here. Is a map of various open source or the best in class skills ecosystems available out there, all industries, consortiums, standards, policies from companies, so on and so forth. So it gives a very 360 view of what's happening in the whole skill market across. There are even some government bodies who are doing some exciting work. So depending on the industry you're coming from, this is a good place to start. So just remember, just search for Global Skills Genome Project and you'll find a similar page. Second thing is there is also another open source industry body called SFIA. It stands for Skills Framework. So if you just type SFIA, and again what they do is they say how you can, and this is more for knowledge industry, knowledge and IT industry. So if you're in that industry, this you will appreciate this a lot more. So as you can see in the image, it says how with skills in the center, how you can acquire, deploy, develop, reward, plan, and organize. So again, this is another open source global skills and competency framework for digital world, especially knowledge in IT industry. You will actually see the length and breadth of information available there, which might give you more inputs of how to kind of go about doing this journey. So that's what I wanted to cover. I want to ensure we have enough time for Q&A. So I'll pause here, stop sharing my screen, and take any Q&A. And as we do that, you can always look me up on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect and stay connected. So look me up on LinkedIn and we can stay connected. But now let's go back and do some Q&A. So let me go back to the browser and go through the questions. So Kanpriya, just checking with you how much time we have, and can I go through the questions myself, or would somebody help me moderate this?
I think you have Pratyusha who can help you with the questions, and I think we have some 7 questions. I think one you've answered, and we have 6 more. So should I can do it for you. I think I can do it for you. The second question is from Amod Sinha. He's asking practically what % of skill database can be looked to convert in skill ontology?
Yeah, good question, Amod. So actually, see, skill ontology, one part of skill ontology is skill database. So we all have skill database, but with skill ontology, what happens is you go through the whole structure I've showed, right? You identify the hierarchy and you break down to categories, subcategories, skill, subskill. So there's a lot of data cleanup you'll have to do. And once you do the data cleanup, you might realize you don't have enough skill repository. That's when you go through the second step of what generic repositories I can tap into from the market, what specialist repositories, and what internal. So skill database is a starting point, but skill ontology gives a more structure of doing everything end to end. So, but once you start doing cleanup, you'll realize. So, as I mentioned, when we did this work, our initial skill inventory was like 2,000 rows of skills. Then, in next 2 to 3 years, it grew up to 3,000, 4,000, 4,500 rows because it was an IT organization and things keep changing so much, right? And not every sub skill is important. It doesn't mean everything is important, but at least you're having them in one common place. That's very important from a database, right? So hopefully that answers your question, Amol. Yeah, let's look at other questions, Kanpriya.
Yeah, sure. I think there's an interesting question. How can skill ontology be applied in tech L&D?
Yeah.
By
Okay, skill ontology we applied in tech L&D. Pretty much. So take the skill profile, um, skill profile template I showed with 360 view, right? Knowledge, tools, technologies. Now take an example of a full stack developer and try to break down. Take a JD, borrow JD from your talent acquisition friends and see how detailed is the JD to map to all of it. Generally, most JDs are not. Then actually build a skill profile for a full stack developer or a, .NET programmer or a DevOps engineer, and do the 360. Then you will see how detailed it can be. Then you break it down to skills. Once you start going to details, you will see it's so useful. Then for every sub skill, remember when I said you do skill inventory, for every sub skill you can map a proficiency level and offerings from your catalog. So let's say you create one profile, just take one profile of a full stack developer or something, do the full 360 skills profile, and then later go and see for all the skills, basic, intermediate, advanced, what are all the offerings you have you know in your learning catalog for those sub skills. Now imagine if I'm that employee, how you can do targeted communication to me saying, Anil, you are a full stack developer and these are the skills you have. Now depending on your needs, here this curated path for full stack developers. You can go to that level of personalization to employees. Again, if you have technology LXP, it really helps, or always have vendor partners you can work with, but you can go to that level. And that's an example of a technical learning and development, but it applies in every use case. You can apply it for leadership, you can apply it for top talent. The approach is the same. Well, the skills you list are differs from industry and organization, but the approach stays the same. Hopefully that answers. Priya. Let's take maybe one or two more questions.
Yeah. So the another one is, how can we leverage assessment in the context of skill ontology?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this, but just to simplify, for all the three use cases of hiring, developing or top talent, at some point you can't have vague sense of how good people are. You need to know exactly in the specific skill is Anil basic, intermediate, or advanced. Could be leadership, could be technology, and that's where assessment centers come in. Now we have, so many examples of assessment centers who can actually do this in a wonderful way by creating an assessment. As I mentioned, could be from 60, 90 minutes to whole day, and you get real objective data of their ability, of their proficiency level, which becomes really important uh, for you to make decisions. So instead of just making vague decisions, you can actually take informed decisions through assessment and their results for either hiring, development, or top talent development. Hopefully that answers, Priya.
Yeah,
Maybe one or two more questions if you have.
yeah. So I think I'll share this. This is a little lengthy question, and it's from Sneha. And she's asking, what are the factors to be considered while planning to build talent development ecosystem for mid-sized organization where the LMS or skill repositories are still in premature state?
Yeah, I think what you said is true uh, in a pre-pandemic world, but I believe technology is the great leveler. So even if you are a mid-sized organization where you might have an LMS or not have an LMS, you can just, align to the entire catalog of offerings from a vendor partner. There's so many MOOC partners, solution partners, including, IHT right here. So you don't have to start from scratch. And based on, for example, based on the uh, catalog of offerings of IHT, you can ask them to give their dump of skill inventory also. So you can start from there. You don't have to start from scratch. So I believe with the plethora of learning solutions available in the market now, everybody is at advantage. Nobody is at a disadvantage. So you can actually, you don't have to start ground up at all. You can quickly build something world class with support of your learning partners. So hopefully that answers your question, Sneha. Maybe we'll take one more question, Kanpriya, or you can wrap up.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
this is
we
the
can
last
turn it out.
one so that we cover at least that. So how can we, no, sorry, can we tie skill ontology with performance management?
Yeah, because everything is based on skills, yes. But if the question was, getting people to put them through real assessment itself is a difficult change management thing. But if people start thinking, hey, my manager is asking me to take an assessment, I don't know how they will use the data. They might use the data against me for my performance or increment. It will backfire. So I think it's a great comment to wrap up. So my recommendation is use these assessments purely for development unless you're using it for a hiring use case. For existing employees, make it purely developmental. So it doesn't matter wherever they land on the assessment. The idea is you are giving them personalized individual development plans. So keep it away from performance management at least for first couple of years till you reach a certain level of maturity from a culture perspective. Then you can integrate completely. Not a problem. I think that's a great question to sum it up and turn it over to you, Kanpriya.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Anil. So on behalf of Yaksha, homegrown assessment platform of IIHT, I would really like to thank Mr. Anil for delivering such a meaningful webinar. And I think I can speak for all of us that your insights on skill ontology has really brought out the value in this Evaluate webinar series. Thank you so much, Anil. So thanks to each one of you for your participation today. We look forward to your presence in the future webinars of the Evaluate webinar series. Stay tuned to Yaksha social media for more updates on the upcoming webinars and more.